Yeah, the first topic we want to talk about is like whether we should go native or we should go cross-platform. And if it's cross-platform, should it be React Native or Flutter? I think personally, I don't really like React Native. But then for our company, we do have a lot of like React Native clients rather than Flutter. Pretty much no Flutter. I think Flutter is still like a long way to go. Okay,
in terms of adoption, or
in terms of adoption, especially for big companies. And also, I see like a lot of benefits of using React Native because of this. Like, pretty much it's a shell. It's a website. You can dump whatever or release whatever you want.
That's a bit of a close, maybe a bit of oversimplification.
Yeah. Okay, so I think I'll just start.
He's just starting the fire.
Okay, I'll give it to you guys. So then,
Should we open it up? Has anybody got a strong opinion in favor of, one of those options to start the conversation?
My opinion would be there must be a purpose for each to exist in a coinciding ecosystem where there are benefits that, if any were gone, we would be worse off somehow.
It's a well-rounded opinion, but one of them is a Google product. So
the Google one. There's that. Oh, thank you. Oh, Google.
I think I agree. I'm an opinion. Yeah, Flutter. I've done all three, and it's Flutter for sure. To make for making a polished app really quickly, multi-platform, Flutter was the best one I've ever done.
I would say definitely in terms of quality of output across platform, and in terms of like a business case, if you want to get something to market across like Android, iOS, and web in the shortest period of time with like a really quality output, I don't think you can beat Flutter. Even though it's relatively new, like the quality of output is insane.
What's the core language behind it? What does it create?
So
the language
is Dart, but it compiles to native. Like they've got a native compiler on Android and iOS. At the moment in the browser, it does some pretty funky stuff. It's got like WebAssembly running the rendering engine, and then the Dart code is transpiled into JavaScript. In the near future, though, they're actually like working with the WebAssembly spec, and so soon you'll actually just have the option to compile it straight into WebAssembly, and so you'll have like a fully again, just use the same compiler but running in a container effectively.
Do you expect that to be a lot faster, or
it's pretty fast as it is. Like the web, there are things where it's still a bit lacking, but there's some pretty big products using it on web. Like I don't know if you've ever used Rive. Rive's like an animation generator. That's Flutter web front end with a web assembled rendering engine done in C++, and the quality output's great. I've done a couple of projects in it, and again, it blows my mind how good it is, considering like web came along late, and again, like it feels like a bit of a house of cards underneath with this transpiling to JavaScript and then web assembled rendering engine, but it works really well, and it is heavy, and so like the big push in web today is like server-side rendering and no JavaScript if you don't need it, and super fast load times, and this is the exact opposite of that. But you pick your market, right? Like it's not a website, it's an application. And for me personally, I prefer my application to be loaded and run locally, so I've got at least some tolerance to faulty internet connections.
Does it run in the browser, or it just runs
in a browser? Yeah, but you can run it native on macOS and native on Windows as well, and native on Linux. Like you can hit six code bases with 6 platforms with a single code base with very little changes. For example, our app that we're working on at Splash, I got that running on web in 2 hours. And so I made some sacrifices. I had to comment out a couple of things like crash leaks isn't supported, so I had to put that behind like a if K is web thing just to.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask like third-party libraries and animations. How well is that supported?
Animations are incredible.
Okay.
So easy to do compared to, and I haven't done Swift UI or Compose, but like they're based on a similar paradigm. So I imagine they're getting. They're easier to do, like the declarative style animations. But animations back in the day on iOS weren't too bad, but on Android they were terrible, hard, just really hard to get right.
And Compose really easy.
Yeah, and I think it's that similar kind of declarative model. But yeah, and the animations are super smooth. So like the Beatmaker app that we're doing, it's like a music making app. It has 48 buttons rendering like a moving animated pie slice, simultaneously, and the code was pretty like not optimized, and it was still running at nearly 60 frames a second on a mid-range Android head. So I was worried when we first did it. I'm like, it's probably going to need some performance optimization, and it just worked. I'm like, wow, the code wasn't good. It was a very hack job like prototype to get it running.
Yeah.
And like, so just from that point of view, sorry, do you need to have knowledge of the way animations work on the web, or how do you go about it? Like if I'm starting it, or is there a completely separate, their own documentation, and this is the way you do it, kind of a thing?
For Flutter,
Yeah,
it's completely separate, right? Like it's got its own API. There's no crossover. It's very similar to React though. Like if you're starting from React, it's pretty easy starting point. So does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Like mildly distracted by my wife deciding to call right in the middle.
I could probably add to that. Like a couple of years ago, a guy in Brisbane asked me, he was starting in a startup, what he should use to make his app, and he said it was going to be a really polished, very animation heavy, like really kind of beautiful app. He was saying, I was like, yeah, use Flutter because that's its strong point, rather than trying to do it like Body or something and integrate that. I haven't really tried that myself. Maybe it works well, but Flutter is way more powerful because you're integrating your layouts with animation. So like Body can't really do that as far as I know.
Interactive.
Yeah. And another example, my iOS developer friend decided to make a game, which is like a board game where you put blocks, a block game. Just randomly decided, I want to make a copy of this one that has ads without ads. It took him 2 months in Flutter, and I was really surprised with the output. It's like super performant, and it's like worked really well. Animations everywhere, duck faces, blinking, and like for an iOS developer to do that like in 2 months and release it in the Play Store, great.
I would say though, like React Native isn't out of the race. So code push is insanely good, especially like enterprise. And if you've got the skill, like if you're already like mad skills of TypeScript and React, and you've got somebody who can help you out with all the build issues that you'll have with React. The tooling isn't as polished as the Flutter team. Like I did a React Native project. It was a few years ago now, so it's probably got better, but there was 2 devs on it. I kept the thing building. Every time a package got added, I'd have to spend a day like debugging Gradle and Xcode build issues because it had just fall apart, and the other guy wrote the code. But it was the right choice for that project because Code Push, like they didn't have the production API ready by the time we were going live. And so we actually got it through App Store review using the staging API, and then used Code Push to push out changes, like a change. And Code Push is effectively like a browser, right? You can just force out a new JavaScript bundle. And as part of that, you can actually force restart the app as well. Like you can actually, it'll get a new version of the bundle and it'll kill the app, or it'll block you from using it and say, do you want to restart now? And you restart and you get the latest version. So there's a lot of benefits to that. And if they could fix the tooling issues, and like React Native team, so Shopify has bought like the React Native Skier project, which is, so Skier is the same rendering engine that powers Flutter. And so if you remove the lowest common denominator problem in React Native, where you're trying to abstract a text view on iOS and a text view on Android, and like you end up with this common denominator problem that they're not exactly the same. So you've got to just use the same feature set and then end up with some weird kind of like hacks for both platforms. If you could do it the way Flutter has done it and have your own widgets or your own components and like having the stack all the way down, and then you have Code Push as an advantage, you get the entire JavaScript TypeScript ecosystem behind you. React, I don't think React Native is going to go away. It's just got some big players, right? Shopify and
like I
Facebook.
think mainly because many firms have lots of JavaScript developers in it. So like you mentioned, the problem that you mentioned about shipping, once you have a core framework ready and people are just building upon that framework, I think that problem kind of goes away. But
I would love to be able to ship bugs, ship bug fixes every day. Like, our current release cycle on mobile, and it's the thing that puts me off mobile development, is like we can't really ship more than once a week. Honestly, you probably shouldn't ship more than once every 2 weeks because the adoption cycle is really slow as well. Like if we're going to ship a release on Monday, it'll be 2 months before 80% of our users update. Unless we've got a built-in force update mechanism, which basically stops them from using the app until they update. But that pisses people off as well. So you've got to use that wisely. You can't be doing that every 2 weeks or people get angry at you. Whereas React Native, you can literally ship 5 times a day and people wouldn't even notice because the next time, like if it's not a critical bug fix, you just say, load the new JavaScript bundle next run. And it'll just be sitting there. Next time you do a cold start, it'll grab the latest JavaScript bundle and away you go. So
I heard that Apple don't allow to code push like to some students. You can bypass their review system, is that right?
So it's actually allowed in their terms and conditions to be able to do code push as long as you don't drastically change the function of the app. So like if you pushed, a to-do list and then flick the switch and suddenly it was a gambling app, you're getting banned for life, right? Like somebody will pick up on it and they'll shut you down. But as long as you stay within the more or less function, the function that the app was originally intended, then you're probably not going to get in trouble.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah, we can pick up this conversation during the break, but then we'll just go on to the next one.
Native is my favorite.
Yeah. I'm ready for somebody to come in and native is everything.
There's certain APIs that really still needs this native. You can't get in Flutter.
There are many.
There are, yeah. And there's ways around. There is ways around that, right? Like the new platform embedding, you can actually just write a view, like an Android view and an iOS view, and embed that straight into your Flutter widget tree. So anything that's missing, you can go and bridge the gap.
You can still do it natively if you come to Flutter. Yeah. Similar to React.
And you will migrate back to the native. If there's so many features that rely on the hardware functions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think with new updates and everything, it becomes difficult with. I'm not sure about Flutter, but it definitely becomes difficult with React Native.
And as the scale of the app growing, you'll find that if you build on the native side, it could be easily to implement on both sides.
Okay. We'll come back to it.
Yeah. Cool. The next one is about testing. So I think this one, I don't know, it's very interesting.
Can I start this one? Because I remember what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, please.
You forgot?
Yeah.
Okay.
When I was talking about it, I forgot the main point
Okay.
that I was going to make, and I just skipped over it.
Yeah. Kick it
So
off.
what I was going to say is, if you came into a company and they had basically no tests and they just had an app running, what would you start with? What would you start writing?
Bug fixes.
No, but I have the testing. Yeah.
Oh, if there were no tests.
Yeah.
I would say automation testing. Yeah.
They don't even do manual.
White box test.
In this
They should do manual.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, a lot of companies don't. But yeah.
Who here has actually worked at a company that required some sort of test coverage?
Yeah.
70-80%.
Yeah.
95%.
So I worked at.
And you just keep writing dumb tests to just achieve that mark sometimes.
Yeah.
I was testing
Because-
nothing. It was
Yeah.
Exactly.
So
this is the case in my current firm. They use a caching library from New York Times, and that library basically handles caching all the time. But we still are writing the test to test that.
But you're testing the third-party library implementation.
That's the weird thing that they are doing, which I am not a big fan of. That's the
They're better off
I argued on
contributing
that.
back to the third-party library some
Yeah,
tests to their
I
own
argued
framework,
on
right?
that. Why are we doing this? Why are we writing tests for this one? Yeah, exactly.
That's in their repository.
You'd hope so.
Yeah.
But I guess the point I was going to make is what I would do would be write a smoke test that starts the app and maybe logs in as a UI test, as an espresso test, because that gives you a lot of protection for regressions. Like if you do a database migration wrong, which is probably one of the most catastrophic things, and I don't know if I remember anyone remembers Twitter 2 years ago because they screwed that up and everyone's apps crashed all around the world. So yeah, that's what I would go for. Situation.
Yeah, same. I think I will do automation tests as well to help with the manual testing. Otherwise, I think manual testing, I feel like it's always good, but then it takes a lot of time. So automation tests can speed up the testing process. Yeah.
Is that UI automated tests?
Yeah.
So it's like,
So it would drive the UI.
yeah,
Yeah.
using one of those, like you can, there's abstraction frameworks as well. For me, I've recently come to the opinion, okay, on mobile, right? Because you can't ship multiple times a day, yeah, you're probably shipping once a week. The amount of time it takes me to write automated tests, I could pay somebody, like I could get somebody on Upwork and pay them like $10 an hour to manually test the entire app every single time I release and not have to continually update the tests every single time. And again, this depends on your circumstance. If you have a super stable app that doesn't change much, then sure, the automated testing is probably the way to go because you just know that it's not going to change much. Whereas if you're changing your app every 2 weeks, you're doubling your development time.
Yeah.
If not tripling it, right? Because writing tests is kind of painful.
Yeah, and that's especially the case with UI tests. That's why I am more on the unit testing side of things. With UI tests, even like new versions and everything, it's okay if you're sticking to the like Espresso on Android, that's fine. That probably wouldn't fail as much as a third-party library would fail because that fails and then you just leave that piece of code commented out or you don't run the test. So that's the problem with the UI test. That's why I think focus on the unit tests and whatever the data unit test is probably passing back to the UI layer. If that is correct, at least from my perspective, that is good because I work in a product-based firm and I just can't keep up with the UI tests yet.
Is that down at the class level to write tests through a
Uh,
particular class or object?
I ideally prefer writing the unit tests for the main business logic.
Right.
Yeah, and UI tests, like we are doing it right now, but it's difficult to do it. Even some mocking frameworks will make it difficult to, sorry, I use Coin rather than Dagger or Hilt or
Yes.
something like that. So integrating UI tests with your dependency injection might also be a bit of a pain point. So
One is good.
Hi, Kelvin. Actually, I don't agree with your opinions.
That's a lot of people that agree with
That's
me.
controversial.
Hit me.
Yeah, straight up. The reason why I see this is that unless the people you hire is a professional tester, or he or she will finally miss some edge case. The reason why the bug happens is that we always miss some edge case. While for the regular users, they just do the regular use cases and still miss the edge cases. So if you just hire some regular users to test your app, to some degree, you didn't complete any tests.
Do you have scripts for them to run?
So that's why I think that automation task is quite necessary and useful.
Don't get me wrong, they are.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree. If you were going to have just no tests, having a launch test, right? Like open the app and log in, or just do your core function so that you don't ship like a crash on launch. I've done that before.
You
And it
find,
sucks.
you find that for most of the bugs, the reason is that we miss the edge case. Sometimes we just miss it, and for some scenarios it happens.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. I think no single option is like perfect. So that's why here we need, to me, it's like we need automation testing and also manual testing.
and another place where UI tests become difficult is the error scenarios, like you mentioned. So let's say you are making some API call, clicking some button and going on the success screen. You probably never end up writing the failure scenarios for that one.
Yeah.
That is when unit tests can be a little bit better, especially when it comes to your point of testing the edge cases. So at least your business logic is good to go.
Yeah, I mean from the aspect of the testing.
From a production
Yeah.
ready point of view, that is definitely not.
That's right. But from aspect of the testing, I believe the program can always cover all the test cases. So it's a guarantee, I think.
I suppose the other part of that is what sort of app are you making?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's super dependent on what you're actually building.
I was going to say, and what about if it's the camera app? If it uses the camera, can you automatically test that, or is that something that has to be run manually on device?
Really
You
difficult.
can use some.
Basically, so.
Yeah.
You just hope that it works.
But like, if you're making a banking app, I want them to have like a bunch of automated tests, and I want them to have unit tests on everything because this is my personal data and it matters. We make a music maker for 13-year-olds. They don't care if it crashes. They might give us a 1-star review, but
How many unit tests do we have currently?
0. We don't have any tests, no tests. I deleted the test correctly and I removed the dependency. Like there is no test. But like, if we spend time writing tests, our app would die, right? We need to iterate until we find product market fit, and we've got enough money to actually sit down until something stabilizes. We change every screen, every sprint in 2 weeks, like mad hacking like crazy people. It's just not practical for us to write tests on that. And again, we collect a bunch of data. We tell the users what everything that we collect. So there's no privacy, and we don't really collect anything like super personal. It's just like a bunch of recordings and some app metadata. So it doesn't really matter if it leaks. Like there's no issues there.
Even when you're changing your views all the time, like, it's not your personal beliefs. But you can see the nature of the app changing that frequently, or is it just how it's presented?
Sometimes the nature of the app will change. Sometimes it's like just tweaks on the existing screen. Additional features, changing
We're
UI.
thinking about completely changing the app soon.
Yeah, exactly.
To a completely different
Getting out a
one.
new one.
Yeah.
So I think that's I think you're right in that, in some apps it is absolutely essential. And you might not want to rely on
If
it.
you want to be professional, just leave the automation test. I'm not mean that. I just mean from the
Really hurt me.
from the professional aspect of testing. If you want to be logical,
Like enterprise. I want to add something to said over here about whether it was a class unit test or maybe more like multiple classes. I've found just in my experience that class unit tests can be quite annoying and even harder to refactor than UI tests, because UI tests are very high level. You move the button, doesn't matter, it might have the same name. Yeah, but if you add class tests, it's really hard to refactor and say, oh, actually that design was wrong. We're going to move this over here. Pull in a different data manager and have the use cases deleted or something like that, because then all your tests are broken and it's hard to.
And it's not the question either, but there is such a thing as like testing too much to the point where your tests are like overfitted and developers are just scared to touch anything. So like, oh, I broke 50 tests, so I'm just going to revert it.
Yeah, testing the glue code versus the actual logic.
Yeah.
Because when I started at Eggy, there was a lot of tests that tested nothing. They tested like a class was instantiated and you got handed another class.
That's the same thing at ClickShot. We did like snapshot tests and nobody ever like checked why the snapshot was wrong. They just reran the snapshots. But it's like, new goals, please. And it's just like, you didn't even look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so from my perspective, like if you're just talking about unit tests, I think the most important unit tests should be like a little bit larger and include an in-memory database or maybe an emulated database, because a lot of SQL stuff is something you probably should be testing because it's not.
Yeah,
so
backend stuff.
Yeah. What I'm curious about is if you're writing code to test the code that you've just written, how do you test the code that tests the code that you've written? Like a tester on the tester. And then so you have like this whole, doesn't that create like a whole burden in of itself?
A point about that. I watched a YouTube video a while ago that was saying that like the empirical evidence says that at least 50% of the benefit of unit testing is just the extra time you spend looking at the code.
Right, yeah.
So
it'll
like,
hit you when you realize as you're writing it.
Yeah. The regression safety net is like maybe 20-30% of the benefit.
There's nothing wrong with that. That's a reasonable thing.
No,
it's like, this should have failed. Why isn't it failing?
I feel like writing testable code is like half the win as well. Like even just because when you write testable code, you're putting it in like smaller units that you can actually write tests for, which means it's easier to understand. There's a huge benefit in that.
And can be easily mocked as well. And coming to your points of snapshot tests, the problem that we've also faced in our firm is like when we run it on a local machine, because it doesn't have too many instances, many times snapshot tests are failing on our local machine, but
Mm.
when we run it on the Firebase or whatever the thing you have, it runs perfectly. So sometimes we kind of totally ignore, okay, I think 15 tests are failing, they'll probably pass on the server. So that is another issue, which, and they take a lot of time to run. That's a different problem, especially on the local one when you're doing it.
Mm.
And
Cool.
costs are high for the backend thing as well. So.
One final point I wanted to add to Carson's point was that if you are doing, like if you're testing the UI, you are testing the logic underneath it as well.
Yeah.
So you write one set of UI tests and you're testing all your business logic at the same time. So you're doing twice the work in some cases, writing unit tests and then writing the UI tests. So like if you want to be efficient about it, if you've got the UI test coverage, then you'll probably get all of your unit testing covered at the same time.
Cool. Great discussion. We'll just move
Let's
on to the next one.
Can we go back one, actually? I've got more to say.
We'll
Okay.
come back to that later.
You didn't register, so no.
The next one is like third-party dependency versus like writing yourself. Yeah, so I think when I was an Android developer, I felt like it's not a good way that you always use a library to achieve something, but then I have no guilty when I did this with Flutter. So I think, but then I'll throw it to the panel or the audience, like feel free to jump in.
Surely depends on how big the problem is.
Yeah.
I mean,
I think
if the library solves all your problems, why would you bother going and rewrite bloody thing?
But it's like, how often is it maintained? How critical is it to your business?
Yeah. I think in my experience, what I've learned is if it is small, then just do it yourself. You don't have to rely on someone else. But if it is something huge, like let's say scanning the QR code, downloading images, and there are plenty of good libraries for that which are maintained well. But if it is small, then I would there have been plenty of instances in the last 1 year itself, like the New York Times library that I mentioned, they're currently getting rid of it. We're just doing caching, and we can write a simple code to do that, right? It's not going to be like 1,000 lines. It's going to be probably 100 lines at max. So if
That's
it's
what's
small,
good.
I feel like
that's
that's
good about
crap.
Copeland. You can actually write extensions to it.
yeah,
An existing library, just syntactically, it's really easy to add functionality to a library.
It's actually better.
Maybe.
Well, I don't
All
know, yeah,
kinds
that's
of
all I use.
What's that?
It's all right. I'm not saying it's better. I'm just saying
No. I
It's just-
like Kotlin as well, but Swift is even more powerful in that way because you can. Well,
You're actually
it's-
extending classes.
Yeah, you're actually overriding the behavior of the library, which can be dangerous, but it's kind of cool. So.
I feel like a lot of the times if I can't pay for a library, like if it's something critical to my business and they don't have a subscription model and a support system, then you've got to think about it, right? Because are they just going to stop maintaining it? And then you've just got this thing that's a core part of your app that now nobody's maintaining and you don't want to maintain it yourself. Like, I feel like, I want to have to pay for it, or I want my business, the company to pay for it. It's not my money. So
The question you have to ask yourself, can you honestly write it yourself with less bugs than what's there?
yeah, in an amount of time less than it would cost you to pay for it, like if you have to pay for it.
What about also the investment to understand really the heart of the inner workings, how it works, versus you wrote it yourself, of course you understand how it works.
Then you might read and you don't understand.
Yeah,
That's
that's
not
that.
job
too.
documentation.
That's skill issue. That's skill issue.
I mean, yeah, that is an advantage. Like if you write it yourself, you understand it. So.
You know, actually,
I think the size of the app also matters. Like if your company or your product manager cares about the size of the app, so perhaps if it is simple to implement by yourself, I think we should implement ourselves. Yeah, like if you just want to write some simple animation, you don't have to introduce a powerful, complicated animation framework.
But yeah, to me, I think like when I code with Flutter using like third-party library, it doesn't make the app like slower. But then with the Android app, I think some of the Trello, they use like almost 100 libraries. It takes like ages to build.
Back in the Android days, right, as well, the 65K method limit was a problem. Like if you pull in the library for two, like you pull in Guava for 2 functions, and it'd add 30,000 lines, take up half your app in one.
But you can get rid of all that shit when you're building.
You can set up stripping and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Takes into play.
Yeah.
But there's also the thing, it's like, how are you going to invest as much time as a library developer in making that thing as good as they're going to make it? You know, so it's like, if I'm going to write an audio player, do I really want to write an audio player, or just want to import some guy who's like ridiculously good at audio buffering and gapless playback and stuff like that?
Especially for highly specialized skills.
Like server driven UI.
Yeah.
Kelvin did this to me today, by the way. He wrote his own fucking server driven UI.
In 20 minutes, I'm like, I can do this.
Yeah.
It's really good. It's really easy to do in Flutter. Using Firebase as well. It's amazing.
I might just jump to the next one. Oh, this one is very techy. So yeah, like when you do a code merge, I guess whether you go with merge, rebase, or squash. Yeah.
These are all topics from
Yeah, can I temper my thoughts from the last presentation?
Would you be able to preface it with an explanation of each too, please?
You need a whiteboard to be able to explain that.
Let me think. So a merge, like you have 2 branches and you make a commit, and the context, I don't really know the words, but the context of them are joined together. So if, I can't explain off the top of my head.
Merging is basically like Git looks at, the main branch and your code, and your feature branch that you're working on, and it does its best guess to work out, what the result should be. And it creates its own commit, and so you can see like you got a branch here and you got a branch out, and then it merges back in and you got a merge commit.
And so if you try to make another branch of that, it will know about all the branches that have been merged, and it won't create conflicts with them because it understands them.
Rebase basically takes your entire branch and then replays every single commit onto the head of the branch you're rebasing onto. So you end up with a single trunk.
Yeah.
And there is a lot of traps in rebasing. But what it's basically saying, so a merge is basically saying to Git, you do your best to work out what the result of this merge will be, and I trust you. And that's great until, Git doesn't have a brain and it does its best, and, there are problems. Whereas rebase, you're saying, so just say I've got master, and anything that's on master has been through, it's been through a QA process, it's probably been code reviewed, like that is trusted, and that is your source of truth. So if you haven't picked up all of the changes, like you've got a trunk here and there's like 50 commits on master, and then you've branched out and you've made a few changes, if you merge it, you're basically saying to Git to make the decision around like what to work. So if I modified something in my branch and it was also modified on master, Git will decide which of the 2 it will take based on most recent, like when it was most recently modified. And so that might mean I've changed a file that is now going against what has already been approved on master. Whereas on rebase, you're basically saying, check every single commit I've made against master. And if anything on master has changed, then blow up and tell me I've got to deal with it. And so you're guaranteed to have to make a decision around whose code is correct, as opposed to just expecting Git to do it for you.
I think on average, it probably happens once a year where you get a merge error that doesn't show a conflict, but it's like something's deleted that was being referred to in some other commit. So yeah, it does happen semi-regularly where you get a logical merge error. Is that what you're saying? Like rebase can guard against?
Yeah, it should guard against, because like if you've modified a file and it's on master and I've modified that same file, regardless of whether or not Git can fix it, it's gonna say, hey, go and talk to that person and make sure you haven't messed something up. The biggest fear for me, and this has happened to me a number of times, is that Git will merge it and your changes will just be gone.
Oh.
So I was in Anonymous Labs and we had like 50 Android devs in 3 different time zones, and everything was merged. Like there was no rebasing. And so I would fix some bugs and they would go through QA and they would be fixed. And then the release would go out and they're like, you said these bugs were fixed. Where are they? I'm like, I definitely fixed them. And I go to the QA and go, I fixed these, right? He's like, yes, I tested them. And just because other changes were made in those files by other developers, they were just gone. And they're the type of errors that are terrifying because you don't know about them until they're in production, or somebody's like, why isn't this working? Or you look at it and go, where is this entire screen that I built and it's not there anymore?
Sounds like we need some automated tests to catch those.
The automated tests might get overridden. But they might write tests, and they've just changed the same files and they take precedence. And so that's the big fear I have with merging. Like, I'm terrified of it now because it's happened to me more than once.
Are you not able to like preview a merge, or there's just not the time to go find all the things that could be wrong, that like you, before the merge actually goes through, you get a preview of what it might look like? Like,
yeah, of course we have a preview, but it's like not after what it will be like. It will be like what it's like before it's merged, but then we don't see what it's going to be like after merge. Yeah.
It does sound like a project management problem too, because
it's a process problem, yeah. Like you have a team and you get a process in the team.
And the fact that you already did QA testing and some developers are like, oh, I'm going to make these changes and things like that.
Does your problem potentially appear more if you're merging without your branch being up to date with the development branch you're trying to merge into?
Yeah, 100%. And it's mainly it is if you're the advantage as well with rebase is it's kind of easy to like read the tree because it's flat, like it's a straight tree. Whereas if you've got a branch and then that was branched, then that branch gets merged in, and then this branch gets merged in. The tree, like if you're looking at your like the actual tree view, it's really hard to know what has changed and to follow it. Whereas if it's just a single straight tree.
But then where's Squash come into with rebase especially?
Do you want to explain Squash?
I love Squash. Squash is
Squash is kind of independent, so like it's just you're just merging 2-3 commits together before pushing them.
So instead of having a look at the Git history and seeing this like ridiculously long bloated history,
so let's just assume that you're working on a piece of code and working on a new feature and maybe pushing small commits, which will eventually lead to the feature. Sometimes you just squash them because you don't want your main branch to show n commits where because sometimes you might be working on a separate bargain, so you just commit your thing and then move on to that one and then come back.
You squash the branch before you squash the.
You squash the commits basically. So they just become one large commit rather than 3 individual commits. And in your history, you just see that one commit.
It just simplifies things.
Kind of,
Yeah, some devs like they commit every 5 minutes. So when they merge a branch, like there are hundreds of like commits, and in some companies they have this CI/CD. There is a limit of like in terms of how many commits I think you can track or something. So then they will normally like squash their branch. So there's only one commit. Then they create a pull request. Something like that.
And also in terms of rebase versus merge, I used to do command line Git all the time. I found rebase really painful with that one, but apart from that, merge was that's the only thing. But
there's a number of times that rebase can be very painful.
That's the only disadvantage of maybe. But if you are using a tool, then it's probably the better way of doing things.
You have to have really clear processes. Like you have to have everybody on the same page, and like there's a set number of things you need to do, right? Like because if you rebase the branch, you've got to force push. Because if you try and push it, then you're on different heads, and now all of your change, it's just a nightmare. You're gonna have like conflict on every single push.
And especially if you're doing rebase for the first time, you just keep getting those messages and.
But also to just say that something really cool with Squash you can do too. This is what we used to do at ClipChamp again. The glory days at ClipChamp. Their CI setup was their Git setup was super specialized. But they would have it so when things are going from master into production, people's rebase histories for each PR would be squashed down into one, and then it became like one commit per PR when it gets pushed over to production. So if something went wrong in production, they could create a hotfix really quickly just by reverting a single commit. And then that was the plan, I guess. And they had like a hotfix branch, which would then deploy on top of it or something like that. So there was that like added benefit where you could just say, oh, your PR, it turns out it's screwed, it's gone, and just like revert it in one button click.
That's what
sorry.
That's what I was originally gonna say, like, because I generally prefer merge because it's just simply you don't have to think about it. You can't run into so much trouble. But I can understand like the rebase and squash thing because in with releases and with like Scrum and Agile, you generally run into that problem where you do all this stuff and then sometime later they're like, okay, we want to release this, this, and this. So you have to kind of cherry pick from the developer or something. And I think having squashed like features in there makes cherry picking easier than just a merge mess.
I think you think of them as tools, right? Like our process at Splash use all three. Like for me, there is no hard and fast rule about when you should squash. Like I think if you're squashing every single feature branch, you're not doing yourself any favor. So I read a really cool article which changed the way that I worked with Git, and it was like you should be able to read your Git history like a story. And so everything you do in your Git history should tell a story, so that if somebody comes in and they need to work their way back and understand, the progression of it, every single commit should do that. And so if you've got 25 commits where you've been updating one thing to update your CI, that doesn't tell a story. That if anything, that detracts from the story. So you should, you should squash all that shit into a single commit, fix CI, right? Like, and there won't be 100 files that are changed. There'll be like one file that's changed.
When you bring up that mention, it's like add white space to run.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I hated with using Git was so often I'm pushing and I felt like I didn't do enough to warrant a comment, but like I did enough to warrant a push, and then it's like, what do I do? So the squash sounds like a really good answer.
Yeah, so it's just like amend your last one as well. Like I do that a lot when I screw up. I can just do an amend commit.
Amend commit.
Git will go back and find the previous commit you did and just like override it with the additional changes.
It's super easy in IntelliJ. You just go amend.
Yeah. IntelliJ.
It's not easy in VS Code or on command line.
Yeah, if you're in Emacs, then you know why you're in Emacs.
Today's sponsor brought to you by.
But seriously, VS Code doesn't have great Git integration. Like it's not.
Really?
Yeah.
Because I don't like using it, and I'm hoping that there's like a greener side. Is that JetBrains? The greener pasture.
I feel like it's a harder learning curve to get into JetBrains, but once you're in there, it is much more powerful. Like it is objectively more powerful. I'm not going to say better because that depends on your use case.
Oh, it's better. I'll say it's
but objectively,
more powerful. Like the Git integration is by far superior, and also the refactoring tools are second to none.
And local history, like
local history.
It's got a proper Git module of window where you do all your.
I honestly wish I could get the IntelliJ like Git thing as a separate to the IDE, like.
Yeah.
Because then sometimes I want to use VS Code, but I still want the Git tools.
Yeah, well, where's the extension? Like the extension.
There's a tab on. There's a tab.
Oh.
So you just click on the tab and you're there.
Wow.
Sorry. Yeah, we'll just quickly go to the next one, then we will have a break. So the next one is like about the architecture. So yeah, when I was like coding, it was like MVP, MVVM. Now it's like MVI. I'm not very familiar with it. But then the last option is like you don't have an architecture. So I'll just throw it to the panel. Yeah.
I honestly don't care. They kind of work. I think you're a big fan of MVI.
Depend on what framework you use.
I actually started with MVC.
Problem is like nobody knows what MVC is. Like you look up articles, and it's like there is like 50 different versions of MVC.
That's true. That's true. But yeah, I started from that one and I directly jumped to MVVM. I definitely found it much more better. MVV, it at least for Android, I personally think passing the view in a separate class is it's inviting memory leaks kind of. So from that perspective, but it works definitely. Yeah.
I suppose this comes down to like when you start to get into this was like a thought transition for me. When you are in like old native mobile development days, you would have a view controller, which is your view, and then you would need some abstraction from that. So you would add your your presenter or your view model, or which are basically the same thing with minor differences. And then VI is kind of the same again. It just adds like unidirectional data flow on top of that with events instead of a function, you'll have a data class which represents the action that you're taking. When you start to get into the newer paradigms in Swift UI and React and Flutter and Compose, like you're already in an abstraction. Like your widget tree, your component tree, whatever it is already an abstraction off your view layer. And so sometimes there is value adding another, like a view model on top of that. But the whole point of these types of tree-based structures is that you can break your logic down into such small components, and they can manage their state kind of internally. So the state can be quite simple, and then they communicate somehow. I think like you've got a central state that they're all listening to, like in Redux, or you've got lots of little distributed state containers that are all reactive and that you can listen to. And so the value of, and this is something that has changed very recently. Like at Eggy, we have view models everywhere. Every widget has a view model. That's it, with like an immutable data class that represents the state of that widget.
Yeah.
And that's easy to do in Swift and in Kotlin. In Dart, you've got to do the code generation, and then you get a lot of files that need code generation. The whole thing slows down. Whereas like we use hooks now, and we keep our widgets pretty small, and so hooks give you that declarative way of writing. You've just got a single function, all your states in line, and everything updates when something changes. And so you have the ease of use of mutable variables. It's composable. It's exactly right. Yeah.
That's the way React is going, right? And Vue and like web in general, as far as I hear. Like they have like self-contained components that have all the logic and stuff in it. The one thing I would add is that Android is a pain in the ass for that kind of model because of the navigation and like possibly killing things at any stage and having to recreate it. So the view model, like the Android view model, just makes that a bit easier. So it's a convenient place to put your state.
Yeah, but you're using Compose, it's not an issue really.
Yeah, I haven't tried like full Compose with the new navigation system. Yeah, not sure.
But there's different navigation libraries that you can use as well. Some are really quite simple to use. Yeah. And they have a central place where you register them and then you get them.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to trying that actually.
Yeah.
I want to see if it's a lot better than the old Android.
Old Android days, right? You're always worried about like serializing your state and dumping it in a bundle before the app gets killed because you got like a gig of RAM, the operating system's taking 900 megabit, and so every app kills the entire stack of applications in the background.
Worst design decision of Android.
Yeah.
It's completely like, I feel like that's the reason Dagger is so popular and it causes so many bugs. Much prefer iOS's approach where you just
Coin is much
get it in memory, it's fine.
Coin is much cleaner than Dagger.
So. So Coin is equivalent to Health. So if you have read any tutorials in Health, you'll automatically, very easily able to migrate in Coin.
Yeah.
And also in terms of managing dependency, I think the principle that Dagger works on and Coin works on are two different things. So in Coin, you just instantiate objects the way you would have wanted them, and you don't have to worry about the activity level injection or the fragment level injection or something like that. So that definitely,
Just pass them into the functions.
exactly.
Actually, on the Android development, I think the key to apply the principle here is dependency injection libraries. So what the Google recommend we use now the Hilt. Only we use the dependency injection components, we can make the code clean. So unless if you don't apply the dependency injection, you will find you will generate a lot of duplicate code. It's also painful.
Of the iOS developers here, how many of you work on apps or that use dependency injection?
How many iOS developers? Have you got?
Yeah.
Android.
A few.
Yeah. And do you use dependency injection like frameworks?
Is there a framework?
Oh,
No.
the only dependencies that I'm really,
There are.
I don't, I was like, like talking to like it's installing like a package.
Yeah, see, like that, it's more of an Android thing because I feel like this whole serialization thing
Well,
necessitates
It's
having
not
the
that
dependency.
it's a general concept, I think.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
Dependency injection is
you can-
literally giving a dependency
yeah,
into
you
a
can
constructor
define-
instead of creating
Yeah,
it
I
yourself.
think
Yeah,
it's-
sorry, yeah, I meant a DI framework that generates the code to do that for you, which like on all the iOS
No,
apps
but
I've worked on.
it is actually just a programming concept, right? It has
Yeah.
nothing to do with either Android or iOS on a
No, but,
larger
like,
level, but
Android uses Dagger or Hilt a lot, or Coin, and they're big framework. Well,
Only if you
complicated
choose to, it
framework.
doesn't have to.
No,
Well,
I
it's
know,
really
but-
hard to do some things in old school Android without a dependency injection framework.
Yes.
Because you don't have access to the constructor of anything. It's not like you
Yeah.
can construct your own
Yeah.
fragment or you construct your own activity because the system has to do it because it needs to be able to rebuild the entire stack. And so therefore you've got to have like this context object which knows about everything and then you can go and fetch it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas in iOS you create your own view controller and give it your dependencies in the constructor, which is so easy to do comparatively. Coin makes it super easy and like I don't like Dagger particularly because it's great cogen and sure it gives great errors, but man, it's just painful to set up. The boilerplate is just epic.
Yeah. So
Zach, tell us,
About
dependency injection? I feel like you're just moving further and further back, like all these answers.
Actually, I dozed off for a minute, I got in there.
yeah, that was my original point. Like iOS developers don't have to worry about this as much because of that Android design decision.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. With that note, I think we will have a break and then we'll come back for a few more topics. Yeah. So the next one is about like UI development, like whether you use, I think Android has Compose, Flutter got Flutter, Swift got Swift UI. Yeah. So I guess this topic is about like which one is better.
Swift UI is better.
I disagree.
I honestly, recently, I used to use Figma. I got rid of that and I just I open up a new Xcode and I'll literally open up a view. What I want, I just write it out in Swift and then I can extract the views. And then when it comes to putting in one view into my main view, I have all those little views on another one and then that just goes. So like reading the main screen is just simple. It's like load this view and it just does it.
Compose does that too.
Yeah, I think so.
See, this is the kind of like.
No, it's not. Yes,
I think Swift UI is good if you use Swift UI for the whole app. Like, but we have an app like that uses UI kit.
No.
Yeah.
Then we replace one screen with the Swift UI because it's just faster with Swift UI. But then the issue is like the text on one certain device is like a different, like the same format, like the same font, same size, everything. But then the title like appears different on different screens on one device. I mean, it may not be on one device, but it's like one model or something.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that when you're doing the UI kit while representable. So it's like it's drawing UI kit down into Swift UI. Yeah, I could see that being an issue because like, Swift UI is still catching up to all the previous UI kit that used to literally run iOS. So, but what it can do now, I feel like is, quick and it looks great. And you can get a UI like built in like minutes. If that, once you know what you're writing, it's basically just simple, I reckon. Like, and the way it stacks on each other.
Yeah.
It's simple.
I think it's like quick, but I don't think it will be as quick as Flutter.
Yeah,
because the left Flutter has all these widgets to support whatever you want to build.
It's also the hot reload, right? Like, sure, you get previews.
Yeah,
but
you get live preview that you can actually click on and like, you can like it will do actions and go through the whole app sort of thing. And like you said with the widget, there's a top, like in Xcode, there's a button where you can click and it will literally open it up and it's like, you want a button, you just click and drag and it will write the code out of what you actually want. So you can do that with literally any of the, I would guess you call them widgets in Flutter. Yeah. So basically any buttons like text or anything like that. Like you can just literally click and drag it and it'll write the code out.
That's convenient.
Yeah. And like if you're only targeting Apple devices.
Yeah.
And you're completely fine with them
I
owning
guess.
you from top to bottom.
There is a thing called compose multi-platform.
That's actually fascinating, right?
Yeah.
I was going to say we should have added that one because there's Jetpack Compose and then there's just Compose, which
Yeah.
have been named terribly to confuse everybody. Because Compose is an abstraction layer, and then Jetpack Compose is like an Android implementation of Compose that like writes to Android. But Square has been experimenting using a UI kit renderer on iOS so that you can use Kotlin multi-platform and then Compose as like an extra cross-platform implementation. It's pretty technically heavy though. It's not super easy to set up.
Well, you can have one set of components that'll run across all platforms, so you can standardize in that way.
Does anybody use JetBrains Toolbox?
Yes.
Yeah, because that uses Compose.
Is that why it's so slow?
Yeah. Well, it used
There's
to be an Electron app, and they changed to Compose. To
Oh,
speed
that's
it
why I
up.
got faster.
It still uses 600 mega RAM, so I'm not really sure what's going on there. But
When you said about Xcode, I'm curious. It sounds a lot like Bootstrap. What kind of customization features? Like, do you have a lot of customization like freedom with Xcode in that?
Like in
drag and
terms
drop?
of Xcode itself? or-
Yeah, like the features, the widgets that you drop in. Do they have the customization that you like? Full customization.
So-
meaning in Swift UI.
So in Swift UI, what you would do is you'd put the button in, then you would design it yourself. So then you can then just reference whenever you need that button, and like you can bind like actions to change state or whatever to those buttons. So then like say you need like red rectangle button, you drag and drop a button in, you add the design to that one. So then whenever you need red rectangle button, you literally write that out, and it's
Oh wow, it's
so you just gets put in. Yeah.
In Compose, you create a red rectangle component, and then you just, when you need to use it, you use the red rectangle. component.
Exactly, same thing. Yeah.
I think Swift UI writes more code for you. Like the fact that you can just drag and drop it in, and it'll give you like the boilerplate starting point. For
It will
each
start
of
you
them.
off. Yeah. It'll be like
I
action.
didn't actually know that. Like
You drag and drop a button in, it'll say action, you write your action there, and then label, you write your label, which could be either text, image, or whatever you really want. And then you've got, modifiers that you can add to on top of that as well.
Yeah.
Exactly the same.
Sounds exactly the same as Compose. Yeah.
But in Compose, do you get the drag and drop? Like, can you
No,
go
you
to
don't.
the catalog and like, literally drag things
no,
in and have
no,
it write code for you at the same time?
Well, if you put the component in your code, you can view it.
You can view it,
It's,
yeah.
it's just like you just abstract out a class and then that will behave the way it's supposed. So you can abstract out the whole screen as well and then put it in different containers. So
But actually, in 2022, the Google just released a new framework called Relay. Do you heard?
Relay?
Yeah.
Oh, I haven't heard of
So
that.
it
No,
can. So for the designers, the designer can just design the UI on the Figma, and the Figma design can automatically convert it to the composable.
They've been trying to do
It's
that
really
for a long
convenient,
time.
but it's
Yeah.
just in the preview stage. I think so. But in the future, I believe the Compose has the potential to
Take over the bird.
take on the Flutters. and as you know, the Compose and Flutter are all maintained by the Google. And do you think who will be the first to be deprecated?
I don't see that.
I don't see either of it, to be fair. The legacy of Android, they can't get rid of it anytime soon. But like Flutter is being used on all of their new lower level devices, right? Like any device, like any of the Google Home devices, any Nest device, and it has a UI, it's just Flutter top to bottom.
Google Wallet, the app is also.
Yeah, Google Wallet.
horrible app.
Google Wallet.
If you try to learn about the Relay, you find more surprise about that.
They've been trying to do it for Flutter in a long time. There was one called Supernova that I was tracking. Also, Adobe had a product called Adobe XD, which had a plugin to export Flutter code as well. Same thing. React has been doing it for a while, right? Like being able to export React components. There's still the problem of like the interactivity of it, and as soon as you have to customize the output, then you detach it from your designs. It's a hard thing to get right. I have a feeling that we'll end up in the not no code, but some code solution where you actually probably will do almost all of your UI in a Figma-like experience. And so very similar to game development, if anybody's done game development, where you literally have a scene, you're dragging your textures, you grab an object and then you attach behavior to an object. So all of your UI is done with a graphical user interface, and then you just plug code into the specific parts of it where you need it. And I'm pretty confident that given 10 years, that's where we'll end up. Because no code has limits, and it'll have limits for a long time. And so, so like I think that you'll end up with this sweet spot of some code where you'll still have logic on the back end, you'll still have logic that you plug in. But yeah, most of your UI will just be done like drag and drop by your designer.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned no code because I think the last topic is about low code, no code solutions.
Oh, cool. I won't get into it too much then. I'll wait.
No, that's okay.
Just to chip in on the Swift versus Compose thing, I've written a bit of both, and they're like so identical. It's crazy. Like I think partly it was an accident, which is amazing. It means they were both really good designs because they both
I mean,
came
Swift
up
versus
with
Kotlin?
no
or-
Swift UI and Jetpack Compose.
Oh, yeah.
Because they all have modifiers. I think the biggest.
They are called the same names. Oh,
Sorry.
are they called the same names?
Yeah, it's a modifier.
Yes, yeah, it's a modifier.
Parameter.
Like they don't
Already.
work exactly the same, but
Sounds
quite
like they're both
similar.
snooping on each other while they're building.
Yeah, quite possibly.
And you'd have people going
Why
between.
not?
But then we're all converging on React, right? Like this paradigm was invented by React.
Well, yeah.
Maybe. I don't know.
Everyone
That.
came before.
Really? Yeah, cool.
It was the originator.
Okay, so React popularized it.
Yeah.
Would be the term then. Yeah, cool. I didn't know that.
React is just better. Yeah.
And then, yeah, and so now like they've like, oh, this is really good way of building things. Super composable. You end up with lots of small reusable components, and so all of the other platforms are like, we should get on that, and they've all kind of converged on that paradigm. And so there's just so many similarities. Which what I like about it now is you could learn Swift UI and then go and work in Jetpack Compose. And the learning, it's not a mental model switch. It's like the language is pretty similar. The way you structure your code is pretty similar. It's very easy. And same deal, you go into Flutter, right? It's a different language, but it's kind of like Java. And, again, it's the same mental model of how you structure your code and things like that,
Yeah.
which is great.
And yeah, they basically all use like a reactive paradigm as well for the state management. So everything's converging in that way as well, which is great.
Well, compose objects just redraw themselves with the states attached.
Yeah,
same with Swift. Same with
Yeah.
Flutter.
Yeah.
It's done for
It's that unidirectional data flow pattern where it's like, event, state changes, redraw.
Yeah.
And that just sanitizes everything because you've got a source of truth to your state and you can follow the flow. Yeah. Instead of having to write that yourself, which we used to do back in the Android days. Like, I want unidirectional data flow. Okay, I have to invent my own paradigm.
I think it's common pattern that is a observable pattern is being applied everywhere. Is that right? Like the reactive streams, also the composable. I think it's just different implementations of observable patterns.
Yeah.
Of that.
Yeah.
And the fun is it's now getting popular, not like years before. Situation now quite different.
Mm.
Cool. We'll just move on to the next one. Sorry. The next one is like code generation. I'll let you lead this one.
Okay, cool. So if you've done any Flutter, you'll know that there's holes in the language which are bridged by code generation. But it's the same with if on Android, you can use was it the Android annotation processing to generate a bunch of code. Or like you've got compiler plugins now as well, which are kind of the same thing, but not really. And so because I think the original topic was whether or not to use Dagger with annotations.
I think the way I found with Android is like it's so complicated, like with all these annotations. I think Flutter is like, to me, it's like I can easily handle it because normally it's just one annotation, but then Android, they have so many different kind of, I was like, oh, this is too much. Yeah.
And I've met people who are just avidly against doing any kind of code generation. And there are reasons for it, right? Like you're now just committing to your source control, a whole bunch of files that you can't touch, or you're not committing them to your source control. And so now you need to, every time you change branches, basically blow them away and regenerate them because Git doesn't track them anymore, right? So if you don't commit those files, it's not going to handle any automatic merging. So every time you change branch, you literally have to nuke all your generated files and regenerate them.
Who the hell advocated for that?
I worked with a guy and he's like, no, we don't, we should remove them from Git. I'm like, oh, I don't want to deal with that because like I change
I
branches
would.
often enough. Sure, if you only worked on a trunk and you never changed branches, it probably wouldn't be too bad.
Gradle.
That is what I was
No,
gonna
it's
ask. So
Gradle is different. So in Android, it's definitely different from Dart, right? Because Gradle will, in Android annotations, it actually regenerates everything for you. It detects there's a change, looks at your source files,
Yeah.
and regenerates all of that. And it's not committed to source control.
That's
Yeah.
correct.
So,
yeah.
so with Flutter,
So what's
is
wrong
it
with that?
like, does
Makes
it,
it
is it
compl-
your main,
Just go.
yeah, so
Sorry.
with Flutter, does it like generate files in your main source code, is it?
Yeah.
Because the way annotations and other things work is they are generally in your build folder, especially on Android. And if this is on your main source code and you have to commit it, it's kind of a pain because it's auto-generated.
Yeah, and it is kind of a pain, and you've got to remember to run it manually. The benefit of that is it doesn't run every single time you compile. Like you make a change, you change. Like in Gradle land, like I'm intimately familiar with Gradle, and I actually really love it. But it's hard to get like compilation speed. If you've got any kind of size project, it's hard to keep your compilation speeds down because all of your annotation processes, unless they work with incremental compile, which is a non-trivial task to implement, as soon as you've got hundreds of thousands of lines of code, your compilation times are going to get into the 2-3 minutes unless you've got a dedicated engineer. And I've had that role of the dedicated engineer of optimizing Android builds to keep them below 5 minutes, because otherwise you've got your developers sitting around spending half to 2/3 of their day waiting for compile to happen.
You may also write nest codes. Maybe you write nest thousands of lines of codes due to the code generation, to the allocation processing.
Oh, it saves you saying it saves you writing a lot of code? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you're reducing the boilerplate. Yeah.
Yeah, like the way Gradle handles it is quite amazing, but there's always the trade-offs, right? It's like on a small project, it doesn't matter. It doesn't add any compile time. Compile time is sub 10 seconds. It's really not that bad.
I think the more important thing is that you can master every stage of the compiling, and you can you can do whatever you want due to if you use the annotation processing technology, then yes, I believe it has more benefits.
It's a bit of a black box though. Like, who here has actually spent intimate amounts of time digging into Gradle when something doesn't work?
Annotation, never.
And like Gradle is a big Groovy blob, and so
Yeah.
it's not typeset. It is impossible to know what's going on. It's so hard. Yeah.
But I guess the problem of the thing that you mentioned, long build times, if you have a modular project, then that kind of really goes away, and that's the great part, because let's say you're just changing 1 or 2 files, it will only regenerate, it will only rebuild those 2 modules, and then rest of the project still remains the same. So yeah, I think most of anyone starting a new Android project is going with that approach because of the main benefit. And in terms of code generation, just like what you mentioned earlier, I think the main difficulty with complete code generation would always be the crazy difficult requirements which we have.
What do you mean by that?
No, sorry. Like your you mentioned this tool earlier, like chatbot GPT, right? It just gave you a code directly, but then we in reality we have kind of, your real life requirements are kind of vague sometimes, so that's where total code generation is a little.
And it's an interesting one. Like, who uses Copilot? GitHub Copilot.
Which does like most of the stuff you want code generation to do.
Oftentimes, yeah. Like I find myself like I just want a serializable data class in Kotlin, and you just start typing the properties, and it like Copilot will just go, oh, you're making a data class, and so it will generate the equals, the copy width, all of that for you automatically in line as you're going. It's
You need to use Kotlin, mate.
But
all those classes, all those functions.
It is true. Like, I love Kotlin. Like, Eggy would attest, right? Like I was up here talking about Kotlin multi-platform before it was a thing.
Yeah.
I mean, Kotlin in the background is doing code generation for you, but it's all kind of just handled by the system, so you don't.
Yeah, it's
really
compiled
notice
plugin.
it. Yeah.
Well, I also use Object Store, and that generates shitloads of pseudo classes in behind the classes that you've got your basic object class, but then it creates all this other classes that can be.
And Realm does that as well. Like it does a whole heap of code generation under the hood via a Gradle plugin.
Yeah.
I think the code generation also can be a contract to make the programmers to reduce errors. Like on the satellite database on our Android, initially we read a lot of SQL statements, but with the code generation, we just apply the rules we set, then it will automatically generate the CRUD statements. It's quite convenient and useful.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Yeah, so I think the trend is like we try to write less and less code. Yeah, so that will lead to the last topic. But then we'll just pause on this, then we will move to the next one. The next one is about like whether we use like custom backend or backend as a service. I guess it's like Firebase or something else similar. Yeah.
There's a bunch of backend as a service options out there now. Like what is it? Superbase, AppWrite. Was it Pocket Base, which is like a single executable Go file that you can just run on the server. It's got an embedded SQLite database. So it's lightning fast, but it gives you real-time subscriptions on your SQLite. But it looks amazing. Like if you just wanted to, like if you had just a dedicated server, you could like throw that on there and get like a backend as a service with authentication and everything. And obviously it's not going to scale, but for just a small project, looks pretty cool. There's, it must be at least 10 different backend as a service options out there now.
Yeah.
So at Redeye, like I'm very much a front-end developer. I don't double in backend too much at all. But at Redeye, they were very much open source, write everything on the backend themselves, cloud agnostic, that kind of thing. And I feel like that kind of dragged them down in the end because they were just spending so much time maintaining Docker and blah blah blah, like trying to get all their stuff to fit together. Like they spent like a month project trying to Dockerize all of their different components. I can't remember the names of them, but like
like microservices.
Yeah, well, they didn't really use microservices so much, but just all of their different things that are used, like Vagrant and H2 database.
Okay, so they migrated everything to Docker,
it's
and
just
also,
a lot of work.
integration with different backend services also matters in this case. So if you're using a solution, then probably, let's say, for example, Auth0 is a great one for anything to do with login because it will give you passwordless login and all that sort of stuff. Most of the banks also kind of go with Auth0. So there are some good.
It's a non-trivial cost though, Auth0. It's pretty expensive.
Yeah. And that's the thing. So if mainly cost is a huge thing. Then there's also, you mentioned, I've used something called as CouchDB. It is similar to what you said. So it's just your JSON files inside kind of, and it uses an emitter pattern kind of a thing. So you just, if you want certain type of data, so all those solutions are there. They are generally on the expensive side of things. So
yeah, and like that's not a dichotomy, right? It's not one or the other. There's a scale from like completely custom backend where you wrote your own authentication service, and then you've got hardcore microservices where you're writing everything from the ground up, to the other end where you can use something that's completely managed like Firebase and Firestore, and you're only writing custom JavaScript functions. And there's a big gap in the middle. Like at Eggy, we used Firebase Auth. We were originally using Cognito, but we had to rip that out because it's garbage and don't ever use it. I could go into a long rant on that, but so we used Firebase Auth. We were using Lambdas for our individual functions because we didn't want to handle scaling. We had MongoDB, but we were using MongoDB Atlas, which is a hosted database with auto scaling. We had some cloud functions in there in Firebase cloud functions because we needed like the database hooks, so the authentication hooks, and so like it was a pretty distributed, and it was mostly hosted, but Lambdas are somewhat agnostic. If you use like, Lambda Express, then you can write fairly agnostic code that could then be deployed to its own server if you're really worried about lock-in. But it comes with another bunch of problems, like local development sucks.
How does AWS fit into that?
So AWS is the umbrella which does host your Lambdas. Cognito is an Amplify product, and Amplify is an AWS product.
Is AWS like a custom backend or backend as a service?
Well, it has a backend of the service. Like that's what its Amplify product is. So Amplify is a direct competitor for Firebase, and it has a lot of the similar things.
Yeah.
But the documentation is undecipherable.
It's Amazon documentation.
It's Amazon documentation. So, and it doesn't have, like, Google does a really good job of having people in the community helping you get set up. Their documentation is really good. They've got a lot of people to help you. Amazon, I don't know what it is, but like it's hard to understand how it works. And
They just build a product and they're like, there, we got a competitor.
Yeah.
Just leave it.
And then they leave it. That's right. Like we found a bug in Cognito, which was stopping us from enabling social auth because you couldn't update the email of a user once it was created. And the only way to fix it was to migrate away from it. That bug was there for 6 years, sitting open and not touched. And this is a paid for product, right? Like this isn't, I'm sure it's free to start with, but you get into the AWS ecosystem and then you end up paying for your other services. Like our Lambda bill wasn't a trivial expense. Like it was $300 or $400 a month just for our Lambdas. So yeah, the other thing with backend as a service, they generally start cheap and they get you in. And then as it scales, like a Firebase example, right, you just have no idea how much it's going to cost you. Like I've given the example multiple times about $12,000 a month Firestore bill.
The costing's always like, oh, it's only going to cost like $0.5 for every some new X
Yeah.
that they've come up with, some concepts, not actually how much your database is using.
Also recently read an article that they moved away from AWS and they reduced their cost by like 60%. So
and it's a question of scale, right? Like
yeah.
If that reduction in cost 60% is worth the engineering hours it takes you to do that, then excellent.
Yeah.
I remember Simon from Outware Art Group back when I was working there mentioning that they had a $70,000 bill for a 1-day test.
Oh, they did a stress test?
They did a
no!
That's fun.
They did like a fire warning app or something they did in Melbourne, and they covered Australia in 1 meter books with fire or something. Yeah, it cost them $70,000.
That hurts.
What do you do? Just like write your provider. I'm like, I'm so sorry, I was doing a stress test. And please get a refund or something.
Sometimes I'll do that. Like Google will bail you out.
Ark's got lots of money, right? So they just pay.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to use all that compute power. Can I please have my money back?
I'm sorry to be the one ranting, but I just like on this one, I think a lot of it comes down to your resources and what your goal is, right? Like if you are trying to come up with a product and you need to get it to market as quick as possible, then what's the goal of what you're building? Are you building a backend or are you building a product? And if you're building a product and you need to get it into users' hands as fast as possible so that you can validate whether or not your product is worth investing development time in, then you should choose to focus on the product and use whatever other services and pay for whatever other services you need to get yourself to market faster. Because if you value your time, if it's going to spend you 6 months to build a product, including a custom backend and a custom front end, or you could get it to market in 1 month and pay for a backend as a service, then what's your time worth to you? Like, you might get through a month, get it out there, and and that's why I use Firebase a lot for prototyping. It's so quick to get something built. Like Firebase and Flutter, I can ship it to any platform. So I don't have to have the platform answer first. I don't have to go, okay, I'm building this. What platform am I building for? I'll just build it. And maybe it goes on web, maybe it goes on iOS, maybe it goes on desktop. Doesn't matter. I'll use Firebase because I'm intimately familiar with the APIs. And it's like early on, it's really easy to start building. And so honestly, after a month, if I've validated my product, then I might decide to move away to some other backend or find a relational database. But yeah, I think that's the focus. Like if you're a product-focused developer, then get your product to market and value your own time. But in saying that, if you don't have the money and you've got a whole lot of time, well, then maybe going a custom backend route or more custom and less expensive is the right way to go because you're not then paying a huge upkeep, and maybe you're not as like you're building this regardless. You don't care, you're going to build it, so the time isn't as much of a factor. So maybe the cheaper option is better on something that you can run for free on a or $3 a month on a light sale server on AWS or something like that.
You should always do it after you release your software.
Exactly.
Cool. Conscious of time, so we'll just jump to the last topic, like local notebook solutions. I think there was a report like on the trend of local notebook solutions. So I think by 2025, pretty much 70% of the new apps will be local technologies. So I think many developers, they don't like these local notebook solutions, but then they are on the rise, and they're gonna we have to use them sooner or later. So I think after I started here, I got to know that there was this Flutter flow. Basically, you just drag and drop. So I think I want to know whether you guys, what's your attitude towards local notebook solutions? Are you open to learning it? And also are you worried that it will get your job or something?
A bit like blacksmiths at the start of the 20th century when cars came in.
They can't replace me.
Yeah, exactly. This one's going to have the programs. Too bad, guys. We don't need you anymore.
Well, we can always just move to be product managers.
That would be exciting.
Yeah, I have an opinion, but does somebody else want to talk?
I'm really worried about Copilot, and more importantly, that ChatGPT.
Yeah.
That thing is
Combined with a low-code solution?
Yeah. Eventually, that a few more iterations, and that code will be really good.
So basically, we just need the Flutter flow and the ChatGPT. We can build anything.
You could probably build an entire app just going, hey, ChatGPT, give me the, build this thing in Flutter flow for me, and it'll do it for you. You're still going to need, that doesn't answer the product question. And the product question is always the harder part. If you focus on a product and you can do it with a no-code solution, and you're not a developer who really likes coding things, then why wouldn't you go? Why wouldn't you save yourself $50,000 in development costs and use Bubble and get it shipped, or Flutter Flow, or
I wonder if anyone's, I'm sure there's a bunch of startups doing this already, but working on UI frameworks that are not designed for coders to write, but are just designed for AI to build with. That'd be interesting.
I don't think it'll be far off as well, because you think about Midjourney and Stable Diffusion and those other image generations. You could take the Stable Diffusion. Does everyone know what Stable Diffusion is?
No.
Yeah, so it's basically an image generation tool, but you can go image to image. So you could grab 20 different UIs that are similar to what you want and say, hey, Stable Diffusion, give me something like this, but a bit different, and it'll give you 20 other variations of UIs that solve the same problem in slightly different ways. Maybe only one or two of them are good, but you've just replaced the designer with one single call to a machine learning model.
That's amazing. Yeah. Basically, we can copy anything, but then we don't.
I honestly think coders' jobs are much more safer than designers' jobs. I think
Because the coders are the ones that code the replacements. We program the replacements.
No, we try to get rid of the designers.
But also copywriters, I don't know why you don't hire a copywriter anymore.
Journalists,
I can get that from ChatGPT.
Yeah.
I was going to say, just ask it to write.
I feel like the next thing will be more high level, more low level. So you'll have more people building things at a high level using low code and no code tools. And then you might need a little bit of code, so you'll pull somebody in just to do a little bit for you. And then you go the other way and you just got a whole bunch of machine learning engineers making this shit better. And systems programmers doing things that are a lot harder to explain to a machine that you need. And so you'll still be using Copilot to fix all your bugs in your low level code, but it's less UI based, and it's more difficult for someone to sit down with a GUI and program.
And having said that, if you're not using Copilot, you should really.
Seriously, it's worth the $10 a month.
Yeah.
Get your work to pay for it, because it'll save them more than $10 a month in your development time.
It speeds up the program.
Is there a trial period?
I think
there
there
used
is.
to be.
Yeah,
I used it until the trial expired. Yeah, it was pretty impressive.
Can you use it on any language?
Pretty much, yeah. I didn't think it'd be very good for Dart, because
It's doing
Dart
Dart really well.
It does Dart really well. TypeScript is incredible. If you're doing TypeScript, it reads your mind. And I don't write code sometimes. I'll write a comment and just wait for Copilot to generate. I was like, I want to calculate the intersection of these two arrays. Boom, it's there.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and then I spent a little time reading it, going, what is it doing? Hey, that looks about right. Cool. I'll test it, see if it works.
It even like picks up on your programming style for the project, so it kind of knows how to fit it into the project.
It'll spit back like your log statements. It learns very quickly what a log statement looks like. So like a JavaScript, it'll give you console.log. We use a library called Timber, which is like a Flutter version of Timber for Android, and so it knows. You just start typing FIM, and boom, it'll fill it out for you.
It seems to weight like the surrounding code files much more than just like general web code.
It's also good, like I don't know how to do something, and like I was doing some storage stuff on mobile. I was just like, write a storage class for persisting to temporary and permanent storage. It's like, it's like 900 lines of code you just gave me.
And then you can probably just copy paste that, Google it, look on Stack Overflow, and kind of understand.
Yeah, or you can literally take that and feed it into ChatGPT and say, what does this do? And it'll explain it to you.
There's a bug on line 14.
I was trying to learn, so I've got 6 weeks off, so I'm going to learn Rust and learn to do like low-level audio programming, real-time audio manipulation, because we've got this monstrous C++ blob that was written by somebody who writes very performant C++ code, which means it's completely unintelligible. And so I'd love to replace that, because like in the last 2 years since I last worked on it, the whole Rust ecosystem for audio programming has come a long way, and it uses a lot of low-level C libraries, but puts an abstraction on top of it. And so I just literally sat down on my phone last night and said, hey, how do I, real-time mix 2 MP3 files and apply a low-pass filter? And it literally generated all the code. And so I'll be able to take that and throw that into Copilot, and Copilot will fill in the parts around it.
And better yet, ChatGPT, probably you can just say, like, explain how this part works. It'll start, like, documenting it for you.
Yeah.
Like a document code. That's how I'm going to write my docs from now on. I'm going to copy and paste my code, so explain it.
A guy works writing his Jira tickets with Chat. Yeah, he just didn't you hear that? Oh no, you went to get a copy.
That's
so
cheating.
Nathaniel, he comes in and he's like roughly gets an idea of his ticket, and then it'll just flesh out all the details, and he just corrects a few things that are wrong and copies and pastes that into a Jira ticket, and boom, it's done.
Full day's work.
Yeah. I honestly think we should be like worried about our jobs.
But is it like we've been told to worry about no code since the 90s, and we always have new technology and we think, oh, now we're going to do nothing, and we find other shit.
We'll find other shit. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
We okay, your small project will be done even faster, and the kind of applications that you work on will just be larger and more ambitious, because you don't have
That's very true. Yeah.
programmers having to worry about such low level or just mundane problems. They will just be able to.
So really, our jobs just get better up from here.
But also more attainable, right? So at the
Just
moment,
get easier.
it takes a lot of skill to become a skilled developer. It takes a long time. I think, but you can develop like the problem solving skills without the technical ability to write the code much faster. And so there'll be more people able to. So there'll be more jobs, but there'll also be less of a barrier to entry into it. So our skills become less valuable. I don't think there'll be less jobs out there. There'll be more, but whether or not they pay, what we're used to getting paid right now is the next question.
You should really learn like hardware and physical stuff that AI can't do.
Yeah, that's right.
In 20 years.
Yeah.
But Google just made a tensor chip with a machine learning model, right? So I think actually I'm much ahead on the hardware thing rather than the software thing.
Don't people in machine learning get paid like nothing though? I heard that like a lot of it is very poor.
Comparatively,
I'm not sure.
the salaries can be quite a lot lower.
Really?
Yeah.
If you think about it though, we've already been through a revolution kind of with Google and the internet, where it's kind of a similar thing where I spend 30% of my time, like when I'm coding, Googling things, Stack Overflow, Googling documentation. And that's definitely a skill. Maybe it's not like a really hard skill to learn, but I mean, you definitely know the difference between 1 year of doing that and 10 years of doing that. You get better at that. So maybe it's a similar thing, like you have Copilot experts.
Yeah, I think for sure. I think it's like who called it? We talked to someone who called it like software 2.0. Oh no, that was on Lex Friedman podcast with the guy from Tesla. You got to watch it, really good. He's like their top AI engineer guy that And he's just like, it's software 2.0. It's like, it's going to be way easier to do. But you're going to be able to do way more than you could before. And the applications are going to be totally different.
And that's like learning how to do, so in our app, we have a bunch of cover art for all of the sound packs that we make. And they're all generated with Midjourney. And so we've got a bunch of like, we've got a team, our community team, and they sit down and they generate amazing looking images of like, that looks like real people from Midjourney. I tried to do it, and what I got was garbage, right? And I'm not willing to put the time into it to learn how to put all the prompts together. So learning how to construct the prompts is just as important as, you know, but again, the learning curve, like they learned that in a couple of weeks, whereas it'd take them a lot longer to have learned, you know, a tool to be able to accurately, you know, like Photoshop or whatever, or Illustrator to be able to draw those faces from scratch. So there's still definitely skills there. It's like we've got an AI that's not public yet that generates a rapper. Like,
I gave it away.
yeah, we give it. This is a pretty small room. I don't think it's good. But like, you give it some text, and it'll give you a person back rapping to that.
Nice sort of a rapper. That's the thing.
Yes, I thought the other day.
Yeah, a music rapper, like yeah.
That's
And it's the same thing, right? Like you can adjust. The controls are a little bit limited at the moment, but to get it to, it doesn't sound good just by itself. I can't just give it like, you know, 4 bars worth of lyrics and say, you know, you have to like break it down into smaller chunks and add some spacing and timing in and change the BPM a little bit. And so what you get out's amazing, and what you can do in such a short period of time is incredible, but there is still some skill in it. Like I spent hours on it. We used ChatGPT to generate some lyrics, and then Pat did.
And it sounded even better once it got like actual rap lyrics. You can't make it like read the dictionary. It's gonna like
yeah, it needs to rhyme. Yeah. But yeah, and it was pretty damn good. Like, this is the first generation API ML model that they haven't specialized. They haven't put anything into it. They're just like, oh, can we do this? And they spat this out, and it's amazingly good. So, but there'll still be people will sit down and spend hours. Like when we release it, I've spent, and I don't use the app that we make that much because I enjoy making the tool for the music, but I don't enjoy making the music that much. But I've spent hours just sitting here trying to get the rapper to sound like I want him to sound like, adding in the spaces, changing the lyrics slightly, adding filler words, making it swear, but all those things.
Thinking that like entertainment and gaming might go more towards playing with AI, because currently we play with just game loops that are hard coded, but maybe in the future
AI is so open-ended.
It's pretty fun playing with Midjourney like that.
Yeah, and DALL-E as well. I spent hours on DALL-E trying to generate an icon for my business.
What I want to see is a game that pushes AI to the next level and has it as like an enemy that is actually objectively smarter than you. Like it literally is better than you in every conceivable way.
That'll be fun for the first
Yeah.
30 minutes.
Will it be fun at all?
Look at Elden Ring. Like, look at Elden Ring. People want to be destroyed. And
Maybe if, like,
that
you just
challenge
go
is
with
going to
it,
be
though.
really interesting.
Like if you had more resources
I don't
than
know.
it, and so it would outsmart you, but you would have just more stuff to throw at it.
I think it would get so smart though, right? It would always be just that little bit better than you. So you always felt like you're about to win. So that it's just dangling that carrot.
Yeah.
But it'll be smart enough to know, like, you don't have to program in the game mechanics anymore. It's like, hey, bad guy, you know, get this person hooked on this game. You know?
sales of new like controllers and keypads that go through the
yeah.
Oh, actually, when you talk about like gamepads and controllers, like I'm not going to refer to anything about like Musk himself, but like Neuralink and what that could bring to gaming, and how like you could have obviously like security risks, but I'm thinking like next level AI that actually it's an AI that it has access to what you're thinking.
Yeah.
It's a what do you call it? Mind reading
Yeah.
AI that is smarter than you, and it actually knows everything before it occurs in your
mind.
yeah like your synapses. The moment your synapses connect, it knows. And you know you have to
really
do it.
worked well with Meta.
Yeah.
I mean, that's exactly where they thought they were going to go. But you totally screwed it.
Who get there eventually, right?
Meta.
Meta.
No, that's
come
like
on,
that's like
like Mark
business.
Zuckerberg.
Yeah,
He
that's
can't do
just
anything, right?
business
But
stuff.
that's
He
the
just
marriage.
wants to bring business to the online scape.
Like,
That's
hey
all he
guys,
was
I have
trying to
this
do, I think.
scrum in virtual reality. Like, I'd rather kill myself.
You're in that metaverse. You got a person standing on a balcony shopping.
The boss is sitting there, Shrek. Hey guys.
And then meanwhile, VR chat is like, hey guys, I exist. VR chat, just like I exist. Did you guys realize it's done better than he could ever conceive?
I'd love to see, like, I don't see why not anymore, but you can't put something like Chat GPT into just like regular NPCs. So like,
Yeah,
I didn't.
That'd be cool.
Yeah, I didn't like Skyrim, but imagine you can just play Skyrim and every NPC you just call him a dickhead and be like, I'm not a dickhead, I'm a blacksmith, you know?
But on top of that, the AI could create its own like voice, what do you call it? Voice
Synthesis.
yeah, like the modulation, the voice mod, or
create its own model, like
voice
sounds like a real
generation,
person.
because they struggle to get the actors to supply the demand for how many characters, and then so they have to repeat. So they're not only repeating like phrases, but they're repeating voices. And if you could,
actors out of work.
if the AI could like create its own voices, create its own text, you give it like a period of time, an age, like the whatever medieval, or because it's Skyrim, you like describe the kind of alien space that they're in.
But what's the point once it gets to that? Games playing games. It doesn't.
Well, no,
Oh no, it's the experience. You're interacting with them more lively experience than.
They interact with each other. They don't need you.
I agree.
Oh,
with
well,
you.
that's in the backend. If you're walking around and there's actually like a society that is developing and it's alive,
And
like
then you
you're
kill
getting-
them all. That's a lot of
Yeah,
fun.
yeah.
Because that's fun.
There's an actual society. Imagine going back to the place that you spawned, and then the society has evolved.
yeah.
Yeah, it's like literally alive. There is life in that game, and then you kill one of the wives, and then it's like now the husband is actually. You could like go down these pathways. Like that's cool.
That's almost
That's
doable
cool.
right now.
I thought we were
that's
talking
cool.
about mobile.
We're finished.
Like, so just think about it, right? Replica, a sister company to ours, does voice generation. And so they've got a bunch of voice actors and recorded all their speech, and now they can generate those voices so that basically now you can have any dialogue you want, and you've got some control over it and generate somebody speaking, so you don't need the voice actor anymore.
Yeah.
But now you can actually have Chat GPT actually generate the dialogue for you as well. So now you don't need the dialogue person or the voice actor. And you can get ChatGPT to talk to you like different people. So you'd be like, all right, you're a 15-year-old girl, answer all responses like a 15-year-old girl. And it actually does it. Like Pat showed me.
I did it, and I kept
That
talking about
demographic
Billy
pretty
at school.
quickly,
So.
You went to 15-year-old girl.
Oh, it's just because of that example. That, yeah.
I'm curious.
I made the other thing too.
Yeah. I'm just deflecting to Pat.
I'm curious how Ethan like
I think,
racial and sexual interpretation will
Yeah.
like.
Sorry,
how that
Levi.
will proliferate.
Sorry to interrupt. Yeah, I really enjoyed the conversation, but I think we have to wrap it up now. Then.
No.
Sorry.